Okay, we've made it. Thomas, you and I have made it to episode 40 of the SumerSports Show. For those of you that are here for the first time, I'm Eric Eager. I'm one of the VPs at SumerSports. I'm joined by the CEO of SumerSports, Thomas Dimitroff. Thomas, we got through 3 episodes last week. I was a little bit sick at the end of the week after the marathon that we had, the 2 hours that we had on Wednesday last week. But I'm back. I'm feeling good. I'm ready to answer some mailbag questions. Thomas, how are you doing?
I'm good. I'm ready to jump in with you. I know you'll be able to riff on these mailbaggers like crazy. Is that what we should be calling them, mailbaggers? That's probably not the best way to refer to them because I love our group. Great.
Yeah, mailbagger sounds maybe a little bit derogatory. I don't know if that's maybe the way that we want to go about it. But
the mailbagger. I don't know if that works.
No, I don't think so. And if you're somebody that submitted questions, we really do appreciate you. I'm going to again thank everybody for coming here, for being here as Thomas works on his microphone just a little bit. For all of you that have joined us through the first 39 episodes, including a football Super Bowl episode, we really do appreciate you. If you like what you're hearing, hit the like button. Subscribe, rate, and review. Help us grow the show. We are going to continue sort of regular programming Wednesday as Thomas talks to me about how to scout quarterbacks through the lens of this upcoming draft, which will be really good. But right now, we are going to take questions from the audience. And actually, the first one was really interesting. This is from Jason Starr, Curious McGeorge, which sent this on Friday, March 17th, St. Patrick's Day. Jason took time out of his St. Patrick's Day holiday to send this one to us. With mid-tier quarterbacks being overpriced, now again, there's some editorialization here, being overpriced like Carr, do you think teams will begin to go with Brissett's, Minshew's, Mariota's on the dirt cheap rather than paying Carr $35.5 a year for 2 years? i.e., is the drop-off from a Carr Garoppolo type to a Brissett type worth saving $20 or $30 million? Yes, question mark. It's a good question because obviously your former team, the Falcons, kind of did that last year. They went with Marcus Mariota on a really, relatively cheap contract. They won 7 games, which is about the same amount as the Raiders won with Derek Carr. It's a similar amount as some of these other teams won with their sort of mid-tier quarterbacks, Titans with Ryan Tannehill, for example. Now you have other examples. The Niners, they had a rookie quarterback, but Garoppolo played a lot better than expected. Vikings won 13 games with Kirk Cousins. So you have mixed reviews there. It's a good question because I think when you think about quarterback play, you're paying for some level of competence when you take a guy like Carr, Cousins, Garoppolo, Tannehill, somebody like that. You're not necessarily going to get that ceiling. And with a guy like Jacoby Brissett, Gardner Minshew, somebody like that, you're not getting either, right? The whole thing could go kaput really quickly, and the high end there is not going to be there, right, Thomas?
Right. And it's a tough question. My natural inclination is to go with the best quarterback possible. It's been drilled into our heads, as general managers and scouts all of our lives, right? We have to get the best quarterback possible. I think you also have to sit down with your coaches, your head coach, and your coaching staff as a general manager, and really drill down on the style of offense you're going to run. And if you can find someone who is, exponentially less expensive, but you can be creative in a certain scheme, then I think you have to seriously think about it. Again, I would say I want to get the best quarterback because 1 year is 1 year. And it's interesting, however, when you read the stats on David Carr, for instance, right? Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think what you bringing up is a really good point. Is that I think we all look, and most of the people who are fans of the game are fans of a team, and I think fans all look at kind of maybe would you guess, Thomas, that a fan has a longer term view of their team than a general manager does? Because Like you were in the general manager's chair for 12 and a half seasons. That's 4 times the median amount now. Most general managers don't get to see, right, the fruits of a lot of their labor. Do you think that the average person who thinks this way about quarterback play believes there's a tomorrow, whereas for most general managers in that chair, there is no tomorrow? So you're trying to get the best guy to buy you a chip chair and a chance.
Chip chair and a chance? Is that what you just said?
Yeah, like if you're a poker guy, right? Like that's a
Midwestern thing, or is that just
like chip chair and a chance means like I got a chip left, I can still play, I got a chair, and therefore I still got a chance to stay in this poker game. Whereas you're out of chips, you gotta get up. So you're basically saying like I got this job for at least this year. That's the only thing I know. And so if that's the case, why the hell would I waste my last shot on Jacoby Brissett when at least I can get on the green with Derek Carr? Like that, I think that's maybe like the mindset that I think a lot of fans don't have, because they know that their team, when they wake up 3 years from now, their favorite team's still going to be there. But most GMs know that if they don't produce, then they might not be there in a year or two.
Wow. And by the way, I want to apologize for the Derek David Carr. I was like short circuiting there for a second. And because I was thinking about Carr, because I think Carr is he's been a good football player. I shouldn't say really good. He's been a good football player. I put myself in that spot. Let's just say Matt Ryan were to be injured over any of those years, I would have thought definitely seriously about bringing in a guy like Derek Carr, because I think that he has quite a bit of ability. I will say, to your point, getting on the green as a general manager, there's no question you're thinking about that every step of the way. And even halfway through the way, if things go awry and you don't have a quarterback answer for your owner, if you could only imagine how difficult that is to be a general manager. Your owner is knocking on your door or scratching at your door every week and you don't have an answer. It is a bad place to be. It's a bad place to be not only for your owner, it's a bad place to be for your team. You walk around the hallways and there's this weird feeling where everyone is focused on you as a general manager. Get a replacement in. And if you can't, you don't belong here. So my point is it can be pretty unnerving when you're going through and you don't have the answer as the general manager.
Yeah, and I think we have a couple really good examples in the league of teams that have cheat codes at quarterback that went the other way for a while before they really got their guy. And obviously history books are written by winners, but you think about Alex Smith, right? When Scott Pioli was fired and Romeo Crennel was fired, they had Matt Castle and they had Tyler Palco and Brady Quinn and guys that kind of were these Jacoby Brissett types ultimately, to not be too disparaging. And you had Alex Smith, who was not spectacular, lost his job to Colin Kaepernick. You trade 2 second-round picks for him, and kind of every single year he was your answer at quarterback until something else came up better, and that was Mahomes, of course, for the Chiefs. And that you kind of know what your limitations are there. And I guess the other question would be, as you are a guy that has general managed now 2 teams to conference title games and 1 team to a Super Bowl, like the other part, I guess, is this question of when you get fixated with a guy like a Carr or like a Tannehill Cousins type, do you think that a Super Bowl is in your purview? I guess the other side of the coin would be, how realistic then are teams about their chances to win it all when they have a guy who's a limited guy like that? Or is it the same idea as like, look, if we catch a little bit of luck, we could be in the Super Bowl? Or do teams even think that way? Because that's kind of where I feel like that's where you sort of get the other end of it. It's like, so I buy myself a level of competence that's pretty good, but I don't necessarily get myself a chance to actually win it all.
So I want to make sure I'm answering your question properly. Are you asking, generally speaking, if people are approaching it that way as general managers? You're saying if they're fine with taking a chance and hoping that they might situate versus like, I want to get back to your line on the green. I want to show everyone that we're doing the right thing. We're always moving forward. We're always getting better. Mediocrity and being mediocre in your approach. Again, we all know that. I mean, that's not rocket science. I mean, it's not something that is accepted with your fan base, your media base, and it sure as hell is not accepted with your owner. As much as your owner might go out there and stroke you a little bit in the public, believe me, behind the scenes, it is a cluster F for sure.
Yeah, I mean, like, when folks make the decision to go with a quarterback who's kind of in the middle pack, do they admit to themselves a little bit that they're reducing their chances of winning a Super Bowl? I guess, yeah, obviously if you bring a Brissett or somebody else, you are reducing your chance of winning the Super Bowl, but you are, through a draft pick or something a subsequent year, you might get closer. There's actually a really good article that's going to come out at SumerSports.com tomorrow about the transient nature of some of these classifications, but like, it's not acceptable to not go after a Super Bowl, but you do, by opting into certain quarterback types, you do kind of limit your chances of winning them.
Oh man, I will tell you, I mean, we were fortunate not to have that situation, but I have a lot of contemporaries in this league who have shared with me the feeling of going into a season with a midliner. It's kind of, the wah, wah, wah moment where you truly are thinking, is this really who we're going to try to make an attempt to pop above 500? Because ultimately that's what you're thinking about, right? If you can be an above 500 team, you're thinking about the Super Bowl, of course. Like, could you get a chance one way or another? Maybe. But you want to come out of it above 500 so you have a positive record. And man, it is every game you're just hanging off the edge of your seat, wondering if you can pull it off with mediocrity. And this comes back to And this comes back to, how you're going to set it up with your game plan with your offensive coordinator, how your leader at the helm, your head coach, is going to navigate through it all. And it is frustrating. Even if you have a badass defense, it is extremely frustrating if you're going in there from day one when you think you're just making ends meet.
Yeah, and that's obviously why the Jets are going after Aaron Rodgers, because they had a kick-ass defense last year, and they still, it's a grind, right? And I, growing up, I watched a lot of Alex Smith Chief games, and it's like they can't, like, they get in the red zone, they kick a field goal, you're like, oh, they're screwed, right? Like, you needed those 7 points or else, because you weren't getting back in the red, it's hard to watch. And like, obviously during your time in Atlanta, you had great offenses, so it's better, of course, than not. But it's like trying to win 3 points at a time is a really hard place to be in the NFL, and putting that much pressure on your defense to get stops, I think is a recipe for disaster in the NFL. And so having a midline guy is tough. We're going to alternate between, our questions we got on Twitter, what we prepared for, and questions that we're getting in the chat, because we do want to reward people for being such great and loyal listeners to the show. So this is William Jones. Can you unpack the EPA stats? So this one's more for me, Thomas, but I do want to use it to sort of educate, the former GM on this new statistic that was created. You think about this, Thomas, like, you became the general manager of the Falcons in 2008, which was right around the time when expected points added kind of became formalized. So, like, you've been an executive in the NFL longer than this statistic has been a thing, right? So that's kind of an interesting thing. But stat and best practices when using it for analytics. Also, what are the best resources? Get familiar with NFL Fast Star data. Matt Ungashek actually, tweeted out, this is great. Our own Taste Seth has a bunch of good YouTube tutorials. Ben Baldwin has an awesome tutorial. That's something, if you want to look up, that is great. I will say that one of my former colleagues and I will have a book out in November. That's like the long-term self-serving answer, but I'm going to avoid that for now. Go to the free resources for now. But expected points added, basically, Thomas, is this number to assign a point value to every play. So, and you guys, you think about from a perspective of, Michael Turner runs for a 70-yard play, gets tackled at the 1-yard line. Jarius Norwood runs the ball in for a 1-yard touchdown. Traditional statistics would give Norwood a touchdown and give no touchdowns to Turner on that drive. And we all know that that's not a great capturing of the contributions to that drive. A 1-yard touchdown is not an easy play, but it's also not the whole 70 yards to get there. And so what expected points added basically does is say, okay, we're going to, from down in distance and field position, we're going to say how many points were added on a given play. So what's really interesting, and this is where like a lot of people were, learned a lot about the game, which is like a 4-yard run on 1st and 10 from the 25 is actually getting you further away from scoring a touchdown than a 5-yard or than previously. So like a 4-yard run on 1st and 10 is like negative point something expected points. So like that play is actually getting you further away from scoring than if you didn't run the play at all. A 70-yard touchdown is going to be worth, about 5 expected points. All this. So basically every play is given sort of a continuous point value based upon like how far you are away from the end zone and how far you travel. So you take this very discrete thing, which is yards and touchdowns, and you basically put it on a continuum so that every play gets sort of a share of the pie. And this gives us a lot of insight into like what things are worth in the NFL. So for example, a sack is worth about 1.8 points to the defense, right? So now you can say if a guy got a certain amount of sacks in a season, he contributed this much to their defense. Now, there are division of credit problems, and that's really where the frontier is and a lot of the questions we're doing at SumerSports. But it's basically expected points allowed you to sort of take everything out of yards and touchdowns and turn them into points.
So let me ask you this. In your years of dealing with NFL teams, GMs, like myself, by the way, we had a good working relationship before I got fired. How many people in those roles, and it could have been coaches as well, adhered to expected points? Like, talk to me about that. How open-minded was the NFL, and did you see it evolve? I'm really, really fascinated by this because there are times we talk about it, and there are times we brush it aside. I'm talking about some of my contemporaries in the business. Some hang on and they find, complete guidance in it, and others don't. So I'd love to get your take on it.
Yeah, I don't think it's explicit. Like you're not running an offensive coordinator is not sitting there being like, oh, I'm going to run this play and get the most expected points. But it is like it's embedded in all the processes, right? So for example, like all the win probability models, they update their score based on the expected points, not necessarily the actual points that have been scored. And so those win probability models inform the decisions on 4th down that coaches make. And so it's more indirect. There was, I told Rico this, but like back when John T was like, hey, how many wins is Ricardo Allen worth? Like that was all built with like EPA models, like that kind of thing. And so it's sort of under the hood, but it's good to know that I think it's good to know, like if you're a general manager, that these analytics tools are not just using yards and touchdowns. They're using some sort of more robust concoction of those two things. But no, they're being used more. In 2016, 0 NFL teams went for 4th downs when they should have, when the model said they should have, more than 50% of the time. So all the teams basically were conservative on 4th downs. Fast forward to 2021, more than half the teams went for 4th downs more than half the times that the models told them to. So something was getting to the coaches as far as like when to go for it and stuff. Now, as with everything, like when we look at flight, like, when pilots learn how to fly planes, they're not learning the Navier-Stokes equations. They're learning flight. When coaches learn how to do 4th downs better, they're not learning about expected points and win probability models. They're learning about like, hey, when you get on this side of the 50, you should be aggressive on 3rd and science is all about translating into the domain of expertise. And so I think it's used there, but it's more for like upcoming practitioners in data science to learn what expected points added is. And it's more for people like me to be able to sort of get you to use it without knowing, I guess, is maybe the better way.
Okay. So if you were an assistant general manager, for instance, right? And you were the AGM with your guy, and you were coming to him to talk to him about this, or you were advising any up and coming executives in the NFL. I'm just very curious to know how you would persuade them to utilize, something like this that would win them over and have them believe in what you are saying, or what some of the young up and coming executives in the league with a data science background would be. Again, this is really important. We've talked about it at Sumer, of course, many, many times. We've talked about the old school football people are pushing away. The more that we can bring along the football people to understand more, and not to go up on a whiteboard and try to spell it out, but to understand it enough to utilize it, to me is honestly where we need to go, because we do need to convince.
Yeah, I think that you want to show where it can lead. Like, you want to start from a common place of understanding. So, like, when I talk to you, like, I tried to explain the EPA thing by starting with an example of where Michael Turner did all the work and Jarius Norwood got all the credit, right? And like, you're like, hey, traditional statistics would tell you this stuff, and I'm going to tell you this stuff. So when Jarius Norwood's agent comes to you and says, hey, buddy, Jarius had 7 touchdowns, he needs to be paid this percentage of the cap, you're going to be like, yeah, but like, Michael Turner did all the work. Like, and here's a method that can help me sort of sieve through the BS and allow myself to better understand what you're doing. Same thing. Like, I think about taking a step back and doing like pressures and sacks, right? So, we talked about Kwesi Adofo-Mensah signing Marcus Davenport. Marcus Davenport got a sack, or was involved in sacks, on 3% of his pressure, or 3% of his pass rushes in 2021. And then he had only 0.3 in 2022. So was he a 10 times better player in 2021 than 22? No, of course not. But if that was the only statistics you had ever used, that would be what you would think, right? And you look at his pressure rates, and pressure rates are more predictive. You're like, well, he did decline a little in 22, but it wasn't by that much. And maybe you can explain it away by injuries or something. And so Kwesi's buying a dip, but he's not buying that big of a dip there. And so it's all about kind of finding common language, and then approaching that language with tools that you have and maybe they don't have, and sort of teaching them how that kind of works. I think, and this gets to another good question, so I don't want to duck the rest of your answer, but this is from @Jarvis Scouting on Twitter, Mark Jarvis. How do you view the impact of diversity in any decision-making process? I feel like we have this at Sumer, right? Like, how do you view the role of the wisdom of the crowds, and what positive and negatives do you see in its application? Thanks. So, question being, like, what's really, like, how can you avoid groupthink, and how can you embed the wisdom of the crowds more effectively in your predictions?
Well, are you talking about my predictions or your predictions? Because I mean,
all of our predictions, right? Like, when we're making decisions at Sumer, I'm not just saying this because you're my boss, but like, we don't make decisions, like, it's not, you don't rule with an iron fist. Like, we deliberate, and like, you, generally speaking, you're going to take the consensus opinion, which, for anybody, James Shorwicki wrote Wisdom of the Crowds. Is a fabulous book. And one of the key components, which I think, not to get political here, but one of the issues with our, voting now is, like, wisdom of the crowds works best when everybody has independent opinions. And so obviously you can imagine if everybody, in the draft process, there's a lot of teams, and I'm assuming you're like this, Thomas, when you were there, where the scouts and the analytics people are kind of walled off from the outside, right? You want to have everybody have an independent decision that's not what's called anchored by an opinion that comes from the outside. With that, you can sort of average out those opinions, and the average of those opinions ends up being more accurate, of course, than any individual opinion. It's also why betting markets are incredibly valuable as far as predictive tools, because people vote with their money which side of the aisle they want to bet, and the books move the line based upon the voting of the bettors, and you get a sharp market there. Mm-hmm. When you were general manager of the Falcons, like, obviously you had a lot of really intelligent people working for you, and a lot of people who had maybe different opinions of yours. How valuable were those differences of opinion?
They were valuable. I mean, I'm a big believer in spending the time hearing everyone. Let's like narrow this down to evaluating, right? First of all, besides decisions that have everything to do with the organization, it could be financial decisions, it could be how you want to paint the field to the color of the socks you want to be. I'm being facetious, of course. I am a big believer in listening to people and in a group, whether it's the scouting group, whether it's the coaches, or whether it's management, Arthur Blank, at least in my case, and some of his, his loyalists, imparting wisdom about how we should do certain things. In the end, I am a true believer, however, and I've said this before, pyramidal decision making. That's how I was raised, and that's what I believe. We build up to the top. Someone has to make the decision at the top. And in the NFL, I think it's two of us. I think it's the general manager and the head coach. We could listen to all the coaches opining on the players that they like. And on the other side of the table, we could listen to all the personnel men. And believe me, I would love to be able to show some video of how that goes down, because sometimes it can get pretty sharp and funky and a lot of, angst. And other times it can be really smooth. But it's up to me ultimately. And I've always said this to our head coach. I've said it to our owner. It's up to the general manager to know his personnel department, his scouting staff, who's strong in what part of the evaluation process. So many layers of that. If we want to go into it, we can. We'll talk about it throughout our evaluations, but it's very important. Just like it's very important for a head coach to know the strength of his coaching staff. Who are the best coaches at doing this? Who are the best coaches at developing this way? Who are the best coaches in creating a scheme? That's our job at the top of the heap to decide, so that we need to know who we rely on the most. Bill Belichick, I thought, had an amazing way over the years I was around him, and still does. He would have a staff of, I don't know, let's just say 18 coaches. Interestingly enough, not all 18 coaches were involved in everything. Mm-hmm. And that's a tough ass guy that's not worrying about people caring what he decides. He has felt over many, many years, I know my staff. I know who's good at evaluating. I know who's good on the field. I know who's good, creating a scheme. I am surely not just going to placate someone and put him in an evaluation setting if I know he's not good and I'm just doing it to rouse the morale.
Yep.
And I will say this, that's tough because, as a leader, you want to be empathic, you want to grow with people, you want to learn, and you want to have them feel like they are a part of everything. But in the end, if your time is limited and it's all about winning and you're fiddling around with people in certain spots that aren't really thriving where they need to thrive, is that really worth your time? We've kind of discussed that a little bit.
Well, and as on field, I mean, the same thing's on the field, right? Are you trying to play young players snaps to get them, prepared for future games, but you're trying to win, there's that conflict there. And it's a tension, right? It's a tension that you have to manage. And, there are, I think one of the biggest things that hurts teams is a lack of contentment. I think, when somebody is always, yeah, I mean, at some point you have to kind of, you have to limit the number of voices, right? And that can be hard. And, my view on this, somebody asked me, it was a great question. Somebody's like, when Kwesi got hired by the Vikings, and again, this is, because he's kind of one of us as an analytics guy, mm-hmm. right? They're like, well, he's never scouted before. Like, I'm like, well, his job as a GM isn't to scout, right? It's to make decisions, right, with the information that everybody has. And like, I think it's not a democracy; it's a republic, right? Like you're almost you get the information from your voters, right? And then you act upon that information as the decision maker. Like that is your job. And to your point, you make that decision with the head coach and often the owner, together. But that person that is, they get a certain fraction of your say, or input into your say. They don't get a certain fraction of the result. And that's a tricky thing for a lot of people. And that is, how things work a little bit. I do want to get, I think that this is a really interesting question. This is from Matt Ungashek, who is a very loyal listener to the show. How do certain GMs seem to plan for roster fillers based upon training camp cuts? This is a pertinent question for us, I think, at Sumer. Certain teams seem to find significant contributors almost every year via this path. What's the planning process like?
Wow. Can we leave that up there for a second?
Oh, sure. I'm sorry. I'm there we go. On-air production.
Let's talk about roster fillers based on training camp cuts. You're talking about, Matt, just so I'm clear, you're talking about you're coming to your cut time. You're cutting down to 53 plus your 16. So, 69, right? And you're trying to figure out about filling with cuts from other teams. Is that what we're talking about? I want to make sure.
In a strategic way, it appears, right? So some teams are strategic about it. Some teams are flying by the seat of their pants. What goes into that? I'm actually very interested in this because this is something from my perspective that I've always viewed interestingly, because now I feel like there's a lot of gamesmanship that goes on with it now that the practice squads are so big.
Yeah, with 16 practice squad, it's a big deal for sure. And again, this varies from organization to organization and the head coach to head coach. I mean, when I was with Mike Smith in those early years, the first 7 years in Atlanta, we were so focused on the people we had in our building all the way through the spring and up to training camp. And through training camp, we had very little patience in digging out into the masses, trying to find that right extra little piece. It almost became a bit of a sort of a, what am I trying to say? Like it was an impediment to our growth, right? Because it had us sort of misdirected and focused in a certain way. Very different than when Dan Quinn came in. Dan Quinn came from Seattle. That's how they approached things. They were approaching, we were approaching it very differently. And that's, by the way,
I think Seattle made an all-time record number of transactions in Carroll and Schneider's first year. For that for what it's worth. I think that you're to your point. Yeah,
look, yet it was like completely different than how Mike Smith and Dan Quinn did it. And I will tell you, there were times when I felt really, really comfortable and settled in and focused in on the more limited movement as far as avoiding the roster fillers. And then the other side it was fast paced. There was a lot going on. And there were times when it worked really well when we were approaching it with Dan Quinn's way and his approach. We knocked on some people. It was pretty good. And there were other times where it got away from us a little bit because we got misdirected and misfocused, right? Or like our focus was still there, but we were still always thinking about churning that roster, right? The roster churners in the league are really interesting. And quite honestly, for everyone out there, a lot of times it has to do with how you were raised, who your head coach was, who your general manager was. That makes sense, right? I'm sure you could say the same thing in academia, right?
Yeah, right. Everybody has these schools, and even down, like I'm thinking out loud here because it's a problem that we want to work on it. Like we are thinking about it somewhere, and I'm thinking about all the variables, right? Which teams play their guys in the preseason, which guys don't, which guys, trying to predict kind of who's going to get cut and who's not going to get cut. You famously said, like, I think you said on the show, like, by the time, there are certain parts of the year where everybody, and, it's this time too, by the way, we said this on the free agency show, where there are seasons of the NFL that the media hypes up as more important than they truly are. Free agency, like, not that many people who were signed last week are going to be contributors, right? Like true contributors to teams. It's not that many. There are 2 to 3 roster decisions an offseason that are kind of up for grabs for the most part. But if you look at contract status, you look at all these other things, like most of those decisions are made for you, right? It's a lot of injuries and stuff like that kind of change the deck for you, right? And that's why we have preseason and sort of, that sort of thing. Very interesting stuff, I would say. Question I had actually, though.
One more thing on that. We're talking about roster fillers, and we've mentioned this before. There are many, many reasons that you might be looking at certain players that would ideally fill your roster, replace and improve, even if it's a hint. When I was trying to bring up Dan's approach, Dan was really big in tapping into his assistant coaches, right? Think about that as well. Yeah. Oftentimes that's the case. If you're pressing your assistant coaches in your meetings, guys, you always keep an eye out there. Make sure you don't let people fly by, glide by us. If you coach them, If you know someone well who has coached them,
Yep.
let's do our research. That's the difference there with Dan Quinn and his approach, and the people like, Mike Smith, who are much more, we're focused in here. We're not going to be distracted by all of this sort of spinning around. But it's a tough situation, Eric, because the coaches on the staff that feel they're a part of bringing in players is positive. It's morale booster, but it's also, if you're relying on people that don't have a real good feel for it and they're just randomly tossing out names and they don't have a real good understanding of evaluating players, well, then you have a completely other situation. Your head coach is going to say, I really like that our receiver coach was pushing this guy. T, can we help him out? It can get really, really interesting and spun around quickly, or it can be very beneficial. It is not an exact science. And I will say, I think we need to look at it from a statistics standpoint. I'll leave you on this. I wonder if we could go in there over the next few months and really dig into those teams that are movers and groovers, so to speak, versus the more stagnant groups. I would be really interested to see how they're, what their survival.
Yeah, you get my mind working on this stuff, and I'm like thinking about how to build a model for that. And it's certainly not trivial. The other part is scouting departments too, right? So like you look at the Chiefs, when you look at their signings and trades, it's always former guys that they have, like former first round picks, aka guys that they probably scouted highly. DeAndre Baker. Like there's the part of our guys can make this guy good type of thing, which is, Kadarius Toney was a huge part of that Super Bowl. So who's to fault them for that approach? But there's tons of reasons why a team would want to churn their roster over, because they get access to players that they might not have gotten access to in the draft. Another question. This is from our own Sean Clement. Sean from Seaback, by the way, on Twitter, for those who want a good follow. Somebody who's a much better Twitter follow than me right here. Who's the biggest draft surprise you've ever seen? Could be positive or negative. Like the biggest surprise bust or day 3 pick who became great that you personally didn't see coming.
Oh, I thought you were going to go to that. I was going to go right to the bust at the front end, not the one that hit. You don't want to do that too? Can we do that quickly? Because I think it's worth. I mean, I'm saying,
yeah, go. I mean, let's start with the solid pick. Let's see the guy who got drafted, who no one thought could play, who was really good.
Well, I'm going to go to my own experience on that, and I've mentioned it before. I look at a guy like Grady Jarrett. It depends. I mean, there was another question in there about premium pick, right? I mean, Grady Jarrett was a 5th round pick, right? We weren't expecting him. He was smaller. He was not expected to do what he's done. So he's one. I don't want to hang on to Grady Jarrett too long, because my head was more focused on some of the busts. That's a very negative way to approach it. Talk to me about your thirds.
My one that was interesting. So for everybody who doesn't know, like I was a college math professor. In 2015, I joined PFF part-time to write articles. And when the Vikings drafted Danielle Hunter out of LSU, Neil Hornsby, who founded PFF, tweeted out a derogatory statement about Danielle Hunter, saying basically like ESPN found all 9 of Danielle Hunter's college pressures and put them on the screen. Like, whoa. I look at Danielle Hunter's an Adonis, right? He's just the yoked out thing, right? Look at his college stats. And yeah, he wasn't productive at all in college. Like didn't get any pressure, didn't do anything. Guy's he's a Ring of Honor player for the Vikings now. He's a few 10, 15 sack seasons away from being a possible Hall of Famer. And that was one where I'm now surprised, right? Like I look back and like the funny thing is everybody gave Andre Patterson his flowers for that, the defensive line coach for the Vikings. Mm-hmm. The Vikings have not used a top tier pick on an edge for 12 years now or 15 years. And every single guy they draft in the 4th round after, everybody's like, oh, this is the new Danielle Hunter. And none of them have worked, right? So like it's a cautionary tale on both sides to not be so judgmental on the front end, but also not to chase your winnings on another. But that's my most surprised pick, Danielle Hunter being as good as he is.
When you start looking at some of the quarterbacks early on, and you and I have talked about this a lot, quarterbacks and defensive ends, in those top 15 picks and how you can hit on them or miss on them. It's another area, by the way, now that we're talking about, I really want to run the most recent data over the last probably 5 years, by rounds and the percentages of, rounds actually playing and actually starting in the league, because I think it's really important to stay updated on that when your owners reach out to you and they're expecting, because I remember Arthur expecting me to hit on second and third rounders and even fourth round O linemen. I'm thinking, wow, Arthur, you want to really know the percentages here. So I'll be interested to know that. So, but I want to flip to the other side for a minute when you start talking about quarterbacks in the top. I mean, we can go on and on about that, but probably most recent, like I sit there and I think about a number of these GMs that I have a great deal of respect for. And, you could talk about Josh Rosen, right? 10th overall. By the way, if we want to talk a little bit about Josh Rosen, I mean, the funny thing about Josh Rosen when he was coming out, not only did he have the ability to do what he did, I know he's a tennis player, came from a very wealthy family, et cetera, but everyone knew from the very beginning that there were some issues about how he got along, with his players and what he was as a true natural leader, which we've talked about many, many times. So I think Josh for me was one that I just thought, wow, it was out there. How do you navigate that? If you truly think that you can bring someone in and work with him, right? Your coaches usually think, well, I can work with this person. I can make him a better leader. I can make him, I can press him to understand the game more and how he's, his awareness and et cetera. But obviously it didn't happen there. He came all the way out here to Atlanta for a little bit, right? As well. But Josh is one of those. I was going to mention another guy that you didn't want me to mention because I know you're going to defend him. So I don't want to.
I'm actually going to bring him up. I thought Baker Mayfield would be a much better quarterback than what he ended up being. Now, he's still going to be a starter in this league again, right? But he's, we talk about like number one overall. What's that?
What's his number going to be? 4.5? What did he say?
Yeah, it's like 8.5.
8.5? I thought it was 4. Yeah. Okay.
Well, I mean, which is nothing for a starting quarterback. We're scoffing at 8.5 million here. But yeah. Like, his numbers were so good at Oklahoma. You didn't have the future Lincoln Riley years where you saw Jalen Hurts produce similarly, where you saw, so you kind of didn't have, the other context there. But Mayfield had like great production for a long time in a college program that was, and it was consistent. Which is also maybe an issue, like all these things with quarterbacks. As much as Josh Allen perplexed me in ending up being good, Baker Mayfield perplexed me in not being so good. And it just shows also like when you go from Hugh Jackson to Freddie Kitchens to Kevin Stefanski to an injury, like you also need some consistency in your life. And it also shows kind of, I'm going to give the Bills some flowers when you put Josh Allen on one team with stability, with expectations that are reasonable, for years and years and years, with a guy with you talk about Rosen, and I think a lot of that, everybody wanted to defend Rosen, but when you have a guy like Allen, who very clearly had a growth mindset, who very clearly had the backing of his team almost immediately, despite not having the production, you can see that stuff. And it's stuff like an analytics guy like me. And I said this last Monday, that's the position we're the worst at. So when it's guys like Mayfield, when it's guys like Zach Wilson, who I liked out of college, I liked a lot. I thought his data was really good. When you look at those guys and you're like, guys aren't exactly diving in front of a bus for Zach Wilson or Baker Mayfield. That's a little bit of a tell, whereas with Allen, and to me, it's how people respond when he's not playing well. And with Allen, he wasn't playing well, but the team still rallied around him.
So let's also fold in Mitch Trubisky. And again, I am really close friends, with their former general manager there. I love Ryan Pace, and I think Ryan is a really good football guy. The reason I want to bring all these guys up, actually, there's a reason, and thanks, Sean, for the question. When I start thinking about quarterbacks and I start thinking about any big decisions on the front end, so more of the perceived blunders or busts, I always come back, Eric, to the idea that these are driven by excessive need, right? In anything in life, right? Excessive need. You put yourself out there because you think you really, really need something. And, you're going to get a little bit spun around and a little bit, I don't know, what's the word I'm looking for? You're going to make decisions, obviously, that aren't anywhere near as thought out or as sound.
Desperate decisions made out of desperation are generally worse than decisions made out of free will. Like that's trivial almost, right? Like,
of course, yeah.
And it actually brings it up though, because we had the first question today was about midline quarterbacks.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Ryan Pace went out, so it was the post Jay Cutler era, right? The Cutler, again, a decision made out of desperation, by the way. They go get Cutler. Cutler's okay, but not great. Then they move on. Mike Lennon's the quarterback there, right? And Mike Lennon's surprised they go after Trubisky. You know, it's sort of one of those where they tried to kind of do it both ways. They tried to have the bridge and they tried to have the guy sitting behind. And like, with the exception of like one guy, which is Alex Smith, like that bridge guy almost never gets to play the whole year while the other guy sits, right? There's just always, to your point of like development and stuff, there's always desperation, not only in the draft pick, but also the development of the guy, right? Like, is it different if Trubisky sits all of 2017?
Yes, I know. That's exactly right. And it spins back around to what we were saying. You know, general managers, the head coach and the general major, mainly the general manager. I mean, he's going to be evaluated on his quarterback situation, right? When you look back on quarterbacks, GMs who have had quarterbacks over the last 10, 15 years, right? The ones that have maintained their job and in consistency and such are obviously the ones that have had quarterbacks, right? Is there anyone out there that has double-digit general manager years that didn't necessarily hit on a quarterback or got more than 2 potential chances at a quarterback?
Yeah, I mean, Lynch is going to end up there, right? Like, and with Lynch, you know, so you think about Lynch and like, you know, we've said a lot of really nice things about the Niners on the show. In 2017, they were the team that traded back with the Bears. They were 2. They didn't take Trubisky. They didn't take Watson. They didn't take Mahomes. They traded back. They got pick number 3. They took Solomon Thomas, which was not a hit, but they also went and got Reuben Foster, who's also not a hit, but 2 good cracks at bites at the apple, as it were. And then in the middle of the season, when your former boss, Bill Belichick, wanted to unload Jimmy Garoppolo, they traded a second-round pick for him. They get him in the fold. He starts 5 controlled environment games where they're out of it completely. He wins all 5. They give him a reasonable contract. And you can describe the Jimmy G era as a success, in my opinion, because you go to 3 Super Bowl and 3 conference title games while he's on your team. But you didn't really figure the quarterback position out there, right? And then you trade up for Lance. Lance has mostly been a bad luck, right, with injuries and stuff situation. Purdy, like, I would be surprised if the Niners resolve the quarterback situation in any true traditional sense by the time Lynch gets to year 10, but they've had tons of team success. But that's a really great offensive coach. That's a set of really good defensive coordinators. And frankly, I would say really good GMing, like, you know, selecting players. They had 7 compensatory picks this year. That means they know what they're doing as far as they draft players, they develop them, they sign the right ones, they let the other ones go, and they make good decisions in that regard.
Well, it is a great point. I mean, you know, when you have a head coach and a GM like they do in San Francisco, and I think, you know, Kyle and John have a really good understanding of each other and their understanding of how they want to put together their team. And yeah, I understand, you know, where you're going on the quarterback side, and hopefully they're going to get to the spot where they have the right quarterback in the right place. But they're so damn good at what they do that quarterback situation, unlike many others where it might be much what am I trying to say? Much more negative to the outcome of where they are. Man, they operate because both of them are so good and so focused on what they know to do to get through any of those situations. So it's going to be fun to watch. They have so much talent there that they're growing with, and you know, this could be for many, many reasons. But I do believe that they know how to put together teams. Of course, we know that. It's fun to watch.
Yeah, let's do one more question because we got to get going. Mondays are normally shorter, but this is from our own Parker Fleming. This is after you and I had a really great conversation about Chauncey Gardner-Johnson and how the nickel corner / safety market was depressed. And that was everybody's discussion yesterday on Twitter when he signed a 1-year, $8 million deal, 6.5 of which is guaranteed, with the Detroit Lions of Brad Holm fame. And So not only I'm going to puff this show up because this is the most prescient show. I know you like JT. I know you like words.
It's a great word, JT.
Thomas is the only guy that likes words better than you. And I'm going to use this is the most prescient show in the football market. We talked about Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, and he signed for the exact contract. We said so. And to a team, the Detroit Lions, your former team, Thomas. You were there in the 90s with Bobby Ross and Wayne Fonts. Parker Fleming, our own Parker Fleming, at Stats of War, who's hosted the show before. On a scale of 1 to 10, how restored is the Roar in Detroit? I look at Brad Holmes, and I think Brad Holmes, I want to just give the guy a hug. He's a football guy at heart, and yet every decision he makes, I'm texting Tage. Seth is a Ann Arbor native, a Michigan native, and he's, and I'm just looking at him. I'm like, buddy, like, they're making all these decisions. Like, how nervous are you right now that something like the other shoe's going to drop? This team is building an absolute house.
I mean, I just wanted you to keep going on because you deserve to go on about Restore the Roar. I don't want to get in there and start talking about certain things that are going to sort of demean your energy there. So keep going on. You think it's that special.
The one place now. They have, so they went out and they, much like the Bengals, and we've discussed the Bengals at length here, they go Cam Sutton, a corner with veteran savvy. They go get Emmanuel Mosley, who from the 49ers, that's going to be a comp pick the 49ers get, by the way, but not a big contract, so not a huge comp pick, but a guy they drafted and developed. They go Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. That is to go with Jeff Okudah, who's in year 4 of being the 3rd overall pick. Kirby Joseph, who intercepted Aaron Rodgers himself 3 times last year, had a good year as a rookie out of Illinois. They have Aiden Hutchinson, who won Defensive Rookie of the Year, I believe. He got second to Sauce Gardner. And then a great offensive line, great receivers. They got David Montgomery as a running back from the Bears. All the questions surround, can Ben Johnson do it again with Jared Goff? Because, as you've said a number of times, I think everybody believes you, Jared Goff's a good quarterback, but he's limited. Detroit has the 6th pick and the 18th pick because of the trade they made with the Rams for Jared Goff and Stafford. Is this the team? Can we talk about the Lions, who are currently the favorite by a large margin to win the NFC North next year?
A large margin?
Yes, by like 20%. Okay. They're the favorite. Is this the team? Are they in the Anthony Richardson position? Is that a team where you're saying, look, we got a great roster. We have the deck stacked in our favor. We have a great coach. We have a great, staff. We have an offensive mind. Look, Ben Johnson's parents are both math teachers. You know what keeps a math person engaged is a project to work on. Get Anthony Richardson, AR-15, into the building.
Wait a minute. Are you talking about Anthony Richardson at 6 or in the teens?
He's not going to go in the teens.
Right.
That's my problem, right? Like, so I think you've answered my question for me. The answer for you is no, because he's too much of a prospect.
Yeah.
Where would you be comfortable if you were Detroit, knowing that you have Jared Goff, a good enough but not great quarterback, in the wings to win for you today? And not expensive either. Goff over the next 2 years is going to be relatively modest, according to the cap. Is that one position where you maybe take a long shot on a quarterback?
My gauge is looking at trading back to 10-ish, try to gain a little bit of capital, of course, feeling more comfortable that you're in that area. And again, you and I both know early in the season, prior to the combine, he might have gone in that 14, 15, 16 area, maybe. Now, it's going to be really interesting. You never even know if someone's going to snap him up in the top 3 or 4. I mean,
Arizona, I was on a Cardinals show last Wednesday, and the Cardinals are probably going to trade that pick for a quarterback, right? Like the team's going to come and, Arizona needs a lot of players. Their quarterback's injured this year, so it might be a year where, going to be semantically responsible, to use your phrase, but the team's going to plan a little bit for the future, right? More than the present with their quarterback on the mend. And the best way to do that is to turn the third pick into multiple picks, right? And, if you think about the betting markets are pretty, solid on either Stroud or Young, and then either Young or Stroud. And then pick 3, if that team wants a quarterback, you could probably bid up that price much in the same way that the Dolphins did to get the 49ers to pick 3rd and pick Trey Lance in 2021. And I think that's going to end up being what happens. And it'll be interesting to see if Detroit gets in that battle, because to 6-3 is going to be like, I don't know if you really want to do that. The last team to go from 6-3 was the Jets, when they went and got Sam Darnold and gave the Colts Quentin Nelson, Kamoka Toure, I think Darius Leonard, and Rock Ya-Sin. That was a haul for the Colts. And obviously Darnold didn't work. So that's a cautionary tale. There have been many trade-ups that have worked. But I'm enjoying watching the Lions operate, because every time I watch GMs, I learn a little bit more about the game. And I think Detroit, they've gone through this rebuild in an interesting way. And it's really fun to see them, because obviously they haven't been good for forever. And it's fun to see them give their fan base some hope, because that's a cool city and they deserve that.
Look at you bringing this around to 55 minutes of mailbagging. That's amazing. We have great questions from our listeners, by the way.
Yeah.
100% so happy to have this. I think it's really cool to be reading these and being able to interact on it.
Yeah, for sure. And Wednesday, we're going to talk quarterbacks. We're going to talk the top 4 prospects in the draft. And Thomas is going to teach me a little bit about what he's looking for in QBs as he's looking through these guys. Little, birdie, so rumors has it that we're going to have a draft show next month. We're planning ahead for that. A lot of people are really excited to contribute to that. And Thomas and I are geeked out to get you guys all to learn Sumer a little bit more. But yeah, if you've been with us this long, give us a like on YouTube, give us a subscribe, rate, and review on your favorite podcast platform. But until Wednesday, for Thomas Dimitroff, this has been Eric Eager. This has been the 40th episode of the SumerSports Show.